Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm going to talk about the iFi Neo Stream. This is a $1,300 aluminum-clad network streamer with a fairly unique design and size. I'm going to talk about a lot of things. I'll talk about sound quality, the features and specs, and I think most importantly the user experience, because a network streamer needs to work well. This should not be a distraction from the music and all that glorious equipment you've undoubtedly invested in. Because if you're looking at a $1,300 network streamer, you probably have a pretty good speaker, amp, whatever other component setup. So this should not be ruining that experience for you. So I'm going to focus a lot on that. However, with that being said, I do want to notate that the iFi did send this to me for review. It won't affect what I say about it. They don't solicit any specific feedback prior to the review. The only thing companies usually ask is if I have any serious issues with their product for some reason. That I contact them first to make sure we can sort it out, or it's not me, misunderstanding or having a defective unit. That wasn't the case with this. Everything worked fine, but I do want to say that I'm always honest and open because I want this channel to be a trustworthy source of information. So if you like the content though, do not forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you in future videos, and don't forget to check us out on Twitter and Instagram. I have those links in the description below. So let's talk about what makes this special. Obviously, the size, shape, and price is a fairly unique standing. A lot of people might be surprised to see a $1,300 piece of equipment that is designed to just connect from your phone or computer to then send the signal out to an amplifier. Audiophile level network streamers have some pretty interesting and unique specs to them depending on what your feature set requirements are. With that being said, one of the most unique things with the Neo Stream is the DSD and PCM support. And if you're an audiophile and you've been looking into those types of products, well, this may have crossed your shopping list. This supports DSD 512 and PCM 768. That is absolutely massive. And when I started shopping other DACs and network streamers, if anyone knows of something similarly priced that works as well as this, that supports DSD and PCM at that level, shoot a comment because I'm genuinely curious. But like other DACs that have similar specs to that are typically in like the $3,000 to $6,000 range. It's not a super common feature. So if you're chasing that functionality, already this is a pretty unique price point in addition to all the other stuff. And if that wasn't enough, this is also a Roon ready network device that supports MQA unfolding up to 384 kilohertz. A lot of these things you may not need or care about. Hell, you might not need any of those four things between DSD, PCM, Roon, or the MQA, or you maybe hate MQA. That's another discussion. But the fact that this has all that while still executing on all the other cool things is already a pretty big win. So I want to go over the physical design and talk about this stuff first because I'd like to clear it off the table while I talk about audio and my experience. So there's a pretty few unique things about it, and I wanted to lay these cables out this way because I'm kind of an OCD person with certain things. iFi, if you're watching this, the only criticism I could get with the packaging is I am not a fan that almost every single cable is a different color. Because then when I add in my RCAs to connect to my amplifier, those are different too. So you have this reddish orange optical cable coming out of the box, and I'll talk about the setup. This is going to the network box, which is this guy. I have a white power cord. In theory, you could have just a single power cord and RCAs if you're doing wireless. But if you're leveraging optical, or if you're just the person that when you look behind your AV rack or your stand and you see a plethora of different cables, it's hard for me to tolerate. Typically, like if I were keeping this was sent to me for review, like I said, and I think I have to send it back, which is fine. But if I'm keeping this just uses a standard SC fiber optic connector. I would definitely replace this with a black one so everything blends in. I don't like all random colors. So I just want to say that that's kind of random. The power supply is nice. This is typical. I've seen this kind of power supply used on other iFi products. When I reviewed the Signature line, it uses the same thing. It's just a black version, but they work well. They light up a little bit. The plug design, it's kind of wide. However, because of the way it's offset in the front, I always call this out because it makes me crazy when outlets block the other one. If you put this one on the bottom or upside down on top because they're the same size plug, you should be able to plug another device in next to it as long as that plug is a reasonable size. So that's kind of cool. Now that I've covered this, let's get the cables out of the way. All right, I just want to go over all the connection options with the Neo Stream and kind of quickly explain, I guess, what all of them do. So you obviously have your power input. This M12 connector, that's more of like an industrial Ethernet. So if you need that for any reason, it's very rare, but it is a very secure connection. It's usually more resistant to electromagnetic interference, and because it screws in, you shouldn't have any issues with the cable not just falling out, but having kind of a loose or suboptimal connection. Now, of course, you also have RJ45, which is arguably the most popular connection type out there. So I want to get into that in a moment to discuss something, because now we are looking at optical. Yes, this has optical LAN support. And for the $1,300, iFi includes what's called an OptiBox. This is where all those extra wires came in. And what it does is you take the Ethernet jack coming out of your wall or switch, plug it into here. On the other side, you have a USB-C connector. You have the optical switch, and the USB-C is just for your power. And this optical port, I should say, not switch, the SC connector, will go from this box to here. So this is converting your Ethernet cable into optical, because the goal of that is total galvanic isolation. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically by using light to transmit data instead of a physical connection like copper, which is what you get on RJ45. Any power, interference, noise, etc., crap that comes in off the Ethernet jack is stuck inside this box, and you get a clean digital signal going into the Neo stream. So I asked them, like, what's the point of that? Because, because Ethernet is digital, it's not so much for the ones and zeros coming in off the data. It's not like it's purifying your data, because that's snake oil. It's just simply isolating any potential noise from your Ethernet to the streamer. Now, I have a pretty new house with dedicated wiring for everything. Like, that power rack has its own 20 amp breaker, and wherever my amplifiers are, I isolate the power from everything else. I tried the OptiBox versus a hardwired connection directly into the back. I didn't really notice a difference. Some people may, your mileage may vary. They're not charging you extra for this, so I would certainly experiment. But again, I just want to be honest. It could just be my environment. It's not like I opened up the sound stage and it sounded more eerie or detailed. This is great if your application needs it. Another way for having galvanic isolation from your network is wireless, Wi-Fi. This has 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi support. You can set it up through the device. It has a little screen on it where you can use the knob to interact. I'll show you that in a moment. But if you're not using the wireless, which I don't, I just plug this in for the video, you can unscrew it, and now the back of the box is a little bit cleaner. There's no Bluetooth. It's just used for Wi-Fi. So if you don't need that, you can bypass it. Another cool thing I'll say real fast is if you don't have any network whatsoever, but you want to play to the box from your phone, there is an option to turn this into a hotspot where it has its own broadcast, and you can connect to it in its own network. It'll still show up on your phone, and you can still play music to it. So I thought that was kind of cool if you're ever at a location that doesn't have LAN going to it, but you want the functionality of it, you can enable hotspot. That's a really slick feature. System upgrade, that's self-explanatory. ANC for audio, yes. They have a lot of fancy marketing terms, and iFi, if you want to learn more about it, by the way, for everyone watching, go to their website. Like I said, I'll have a link in the description below. I'm going to keep it simple. They have noise filtration on the USB because in theory, they don't want any noise or artifacts coming in from USB that would impact your sound. Now, if this is a flash drive, it's totally isolated from everything else anyway. So there shouldn't be a lot of noise. However, the fact that they say they have filters on there, it's nice. It's not like you want things to add noise anyway, so you might as well. Then you have an I2S connector via HDMI. This HDMI is not HDMI ARC, so don't connect this to a TV and then wonder why it's not working. Look up I2S if you ever need that functionality. The output. So this is where I kind of wish the layout was a little different for my application. Now you have 4.4 balanced. You can buy a 4.4 balanced or Pentagon connector that goes into dual XLR. So if you have amplifiers like the ones behind me that support XLR input for balanced connections, I kind of have to use that. Now iFi makes a good one. It's $100, which is a lot for a cable, but at least their ratings are good. The only negative criticism I saw on the cable was that it's a little pricey for a cable, but no one complained about it not working well or sounding good. They have some more generic brands online on Amazon from $35 to $50, so you can save some money there. However, just make sure that if you do something like that, you shop around and get a good quality cable. Typically, I've just been using RCA, and it sounded great. I only have a 3-foot run, so the analog connection's been fine. You have optical, you have coaxial, and the AES EBU connection, which is basically like the SPDIF optical connector, but through XLR. So if you have a device that supports this connector, you can use a standard 3-pin XLR cable and still get a digital signal going through there instead of like coax or optical. And I already mentioned the Wi-Fi. So this thing's loaded with I/O and it's pretty flexible. However, for what a lot of people do use it for, you're basically going to have one audio option going to your amplifier or other equipment, and then one network source, whether it's wireless, Ethernet, optical, etc. And once you've done that, the rest of it focuses on the UI, your app, and your computer. And I wanted to talk about the physical box real quick. This is all aluminum. It has this gorgeous like powder coated finish on it. This is great because it greatly reduces the impact that dust has on it and fingerprints. It hides both really well while also looking, pretty elegant and somewhat flashy. I like this really tiny, mirrored edge that they do. Now, obviously with this knob and the way this is brushed, this is the only area that really accumulates any kind of dust or fingerprints. And of course, it's where you touch it. But it does look really pretty. And then you have this stand. So there's a little ball inside. I don't know if the camera's picking that up. Basically, that little noise, it rattles because it's not like it's loose. There's a ball that is doing like a gravity sensor. When the unit's laying flat, the screen is in a landscape mode. And when you stand it vertically, that little ball inside tells it it's upright. And the screen will basically rotate and the software will kind of rewrap the picture in this mode. This little stand here, it's just friction mount. It has the little silicone, or like, I guess it's more of a feltish rubber pad, and that just slides in very securely. It's not like it's going to fall out. So I like that design. It's beautiful in vertical mode. Now for my rack, it didn't really fit because I didn't want to put it next to my turntable. So I laid it flat. The only thing that was kind of weird, you can see these little crosses. I'm going to see if I can get this on camera. So I apologize if for any reason it doesn't show up. Can you see that little, let me block my face. See those little crosses right there? Kind of like in this region. That's telling you where to put the rubber feet, because otherwise you don't just want the metal resting directly on your surface. So if this is standing vertically, the only thing I wasn't crazy about is you kind of see those little crosses. It's really subtle, but at first I was like, what the heck is that? Did I mark it up or something? I don't know why. I was tired when I noticed it, but then I realized what it was for. So it's just to help you put the 4 rubber feet in the perfect location. However, I think most people could have handled that. Anyway, that's what they're there for. All right, so I just powered this up, and if you hear noise in the background, I have a pretty gnarly storm happening outside right now. I'm going to connect this antenna because I'm hoping that's a strong enough signal to gain Wi-Fi, so I can show you a few other features. But I wanted to show you a couple things as we get into the user interface. And sure enough, I got a local IP. I don't know if you noticed that the light was red prior to me doing that, and now it's white. This color, it's not like it's full RGB. There's 4 color modes, and each color indicates your network status. Red being disconnected, then your negotiated speeds, and white is your full speed connection. So it's kind of like a good, better, best. In analog mode, it's showing the IP when nothing is connected to it, because you can type this IP address into your browser and then pull up a relatively simple to use HTML interface. That interface can be used for playing local files from your computer to the device. If the device has a flash drive connected to it, you can browse the contents from your computer. You can also make setting changes, updates, little configuration changes to kind of fine tune the user experience to your liking. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, when the unit's facing up, it thinks it's vertical, so I'm gonna have to hold it this way while I talk about some things. So you notice on the screen here, it says AIO analog, and that stands for all-in-one analog output. All-in-one basically means all of the services that this supports are enabled. So that includes Spotify Connect, Tidal Connect, Apple AirPlay, NAA for network audio device or adapter, UPnP, DLNA, Roon, etc. There's a lot of things enabled and running, and that of course takes up some CPU resources and memory. So if you know you are only going to use Tidal Connect, for example, you can put it in exclusive mode, select Tidal as your exclusive feature, and now that's all this unit does. And it didn't make a difference for me sound quality wise, but the unit was just slightly more snappy at loading things, and it never had an issue like when I first turned it on. It would be ready to go. I had no stutters. In AIO mode, when I first turn it on, because I typically shut everything down when I'm not using it. Think of this as like a specialized, not a smartphone because it's not like a phone, but it's running an operating system. And when you first turn it on with all services enabled, then cast to it right away, it's still loading and kind of enabling things, enumerating data, etc. And I noticed when it did that, I had a couple little stutters or hiccups in the sound when I was casting to it early on. Within about 10 or 15 minutes of listening, it never did it again. And as long as I left the unit on, it never happened, period, after that. I left this on for days at a time, and those artifacts never came back. It was only like when it first booted up. In exclusive mode, it never did that. Now, I've had this for almost 2 months. I've been using it a lot. So I wanted to use it for a long time so I can identify things like that. But overall, it was pretty solid. I think that's normal with a lot of things when they're first initialized. So I just wanted to call that out. Now, as far as casting or sending music to it, I tried wireless. That's why it automatically connected. And I tried optical. And I tried Ethernet. Again, I think I mentioned this earlier. I couldn't tell a difference between Ethernet versus optical sound quality-wise. I do prefer a physical connection because it's faster. I don't like saturating my wireless network. But I did test wireless because I wanted to make sure it was stable. And I've seen some people have some issues with it dropping off of Wi-Fi before, but it never happened to me. I use Ubiquiti access points. I have 3 of them throughout the home. And all I did was connect it to my access point and it was rock solid. Again, I used it for several weeks, like 2-3 weeks on Wi-Fi. And it was fine. But me just being, I have this nice shiny optical box. I'm going to use it when I can, and I have Ethernet there. So I went back to that. Both of them work fine. I did notice what was really cool is it can connect to both simultaneously. So I actually had 2 IP addresses on the unit, and I was able to access it with both IPs. Might come in handy if you have 2 separate networks and you want one on a physical connection and other on wireless. Something different, but again, I wanted to call out kind of the odd nuances that it does. You can have this work because this is a DAC. You can have it be as a DAC and send it out full volume, which is typically what I recommend. If for any reason you need a preamp, you can enable that. And now you can see I can have my volume adjustment. It goes all the way to 0. This is a digital gain through the software. It's not like an actual volume knob. So just keep in mind because that does behave differently than a volume knob. Otherwise, you want to leave it without that. You can turn it on and off through this, or you can also, when you log into the device via your computer, you can disable that as well, and then the volume knob basically does nothing unless you're in settings. So speaking of settings, let's talk about a few things real fast. So I'm going to press and hold the settings icon. This says analog. That's my output, and then I can send output to digital instead. So I'm going to keep that. Now, if I go to AIO, this is what I was talking about earlier for the audio streaming mode. I press the wheel in. There it says, is it IG? Whoa, I can't really read upside down. Let's try this. Yeah, IGN Analyst is one mode. And of course, I waited too long. So let's press and hold this down again. And go back, press it. AIO. So you have the IGN Analyst. You have Roon ready. You have Title, DLNA, and AIO. So those are the modes I can select through the software. I do want to say the other thing that's kind of weird is the volume knob works backwards. So like you would think that when you rotate it clockwise, it's going to the right, like most consumer electronics, at least here in the States. But for some reason it's backwards. So that kind of makes it, once you learn it, it's fine, but it was weird. Let's go next. This is your hotspot and it says off. I don't need it to be on, so I'm going to leave that disabled. Screen brightness and filter. Now, as you can see, I'm on the minimum filter, and minimum performed really well for me. You also have GTO, which is basically kind of like an MQA style filter. If you like that style, there's some distortion and artifacts that come with that. So you have bit perfect, which is basically like no oversampling mode, and then or not. Then you have your standard filter. I liked different filters. It was fairly noticeable. I didn't think I'd notice as much. Like I have other devices like what was it? My topping D30 DAC has like 9 filters on it, and a lot of them you can't hear a single difference. This one was more noticeable. I'm not a huge fan of the GTO filter. It sounded kind of like digital in the wrong way for me, but because it's adding some distortion, depending on what your sound preferences are, you may like that filter. I kind of went between bit perfect, minimum, and standard. I actually used bit perfect quite a bit, even though measurably it's not always the best thing out there. Minimum tends to measure better, but I don't want to go down the path of discussing filters. I just want to provide my honest experience because on some stuff, you're not going to hear a difference. A lot of people won't hear the difference between all four. So what I recommend though with filters is just try them and see if you hear a difference. And if so, just pick what you like. Don't worry about what other people say online about measurements and how it sounds. Just pick what you like. It's your product. It's no one else's. Enjoy your music. So that's why I don't want to go down that rabbit hole with filters. I do want to say, on the note of sound quality, we're going to slowly transition into that. This uses Burr Brown DACs. Now, it's a custom Burr Brown system. It's kind of like, was it the DSD? I have it written down somewhere. Yeah, the Neo iDSD. That's an $800 DAC, USB DAC. It uses the same DAC. It's just, I guess reconfigured for network streaming, which is why this costs more because there's more stuff in it. Burr Brown, typically, like when you compare it to AKM and ESS, some people prefer AKM and ESS more. Burr Brown on the less expensive iFi products like the Zen Air, they sound a little bit warmer, just slightly softer, like in the treble region, but it's slight. I listen to this stuff critically for hours at a time. This implementation is one of the better Burr Brown setups I've ever heard because it's incredibly neutral. It's very transparent, and I wouldn't have thought it was a Burr Brown DAC. It sounds more like what I typically hear ESS DACs sound like, and depending on the implementation, I suppose you can compare it to AKM because of that. It just depends on the chip. Honestly, it's not just the DAC that impacts the sound. It's how they're utilizing it. And the way iFi configured this particular device sounds great, Burr Brown DAC or not. It's very neutral, and I didn't find it was adding its own color or tinge to the music to make it sound different. I got a bigger difference from just swapping filters than assuming, ESS versus Burr Brown versus AKM, that type of thing. So it is a good DAC. Some people may or may not like it, but again, I always encourage you to listen to it because this is not your typical warmer sounding implementation. This is a higher quality build and design, and it sounds like it. So now it's time to talk about sound quality, and man, that storm is picking up. I've been hearing some serious wind. This thing performed exceptionally well on all of the other stuff I talked about. That's why the majority of my review was on that, because a network player needs to do those things pretty much perfectly because that's what it's designed to do. Now, you'd expect a $1,300 product will sound good. And when you see things on the spec sheet like femto precision clocks for jitter reduction, fully balanced analog circuitry so you have really clean signal pass, the noise filtration on USB, the galvanic isolation on network, it's very clear that iFi wanted to produce a good sounding product, and they executed that extremely well. Now, I expected it to sound good. I liked their $100 to $300 iFi products. So obviously this being a lot more money, it better perform well. And it did. I found the sound profile to be incredibly neutral, incredibly clean. I mentioned that earlier. It didn't sound as warm or smoothed over as some other Burr Brown DACs or even less expensive DACs in general. It was incredibly clean, but it wasn't too energetic or forward either. It's a very neutral sounding DAC. So with that being said, there's only so much you can extrapolate from that because it's not drastically changing the sound profile. It's staying true to the source. Use that as your reference. When I connect a computer with a good USB DAC to my amplifier and do direct playback, it can sound excellent. The fact that I can preserve that level of performance through a wireless implementation or network-based implementation is extremely, it's invaluable. The convenience that you get by having this connected to an amplifier, let's say in a living room or a listening station like this, and being able to send music to it through your phone and preserve that sound quality is great. What was apparent was the noise floor was exceptionally low, whether it's thanks to all of those special marketing terms that they use for things to improve sound quality, or just purely from making a high quality well-designed unit. It sounds the way it should, okay? You can play a live classical or jazz recording, something with really wide dynamic range that has some really quiet parts, and crank your stereo, and this isn't going to add any extra hiss. It's not going to compress it. It's going to leave that dynamic range wide open and stay true to the source. Then when you play something that's incredibly busy or, volume's cranked to 11, a lot of modern music is compressed significantly and it's all at a very high decibel. to keep the noise as loud as possible and like the loudness wars. This is going to do that fine without adding any distortion either. It has a really wide tolerance for noise on the music recording side while not generating its own. And I think that neutrality and that cleanliness of the presentation is exactly what a high-end DAC should do. I'm not going to say that the soundstage opened up to a whole nother world and it was like birds were everywhere. I do hear a lot of pretty incredible things with music, but it's not because it's a transformative experience purely from the DAC. It's part of a whole system. When you get really good speakers, like if you've noticed behind me, I have the Alta Audio Atoms finally. I've been dying to get my hands on those speakers. They're beautiful speakers. I'll be reviewing those once I break them in. I use this DAC for those, connected to my PS Audio Stellar Strata and my Vincent Audio SV228 hybrid tube integrated amplifier. This was the source for a majority of my music listening lately. I used to have my laptop just sit on that table in the middle and have a USB DAC straight in. But the convenience you get from sending it to any device on the network to that and preserving that same sound quality, it sounded amazing. I actually preferred the way this DAC sounded over my Stellar Strata, which I just bought, and that uses an ESS DAC. It's a good sounding DAC. I liked the way this presented the music just a little bit more, and I was doing it through the network. So to me, that's a big win. I absolutely love the performance of this. I think, again, you have to keep in mind that at $1,300, you're getting a Roon ready endpoint with DSD 512, PCM 768, a plethora of network connections. You get some analog and digital outputs, of course, so depending on what your setup is, you may find value there. And it's fairly compact, so you free up some space. It's not like a standard, it's not like a cube. It's just kind of odd the way it's shaped, but I was able to put it next to my phono preamp on one shelf instead of being stuck somewhere else because the unit was too big. So I actually like the form factor too. I hope you found this review helpful. I hope you learned something new today about either network streamers or this product in general. I'd love to see you come back for future videos, so don't forget to like and subscribe. With that being said, thank you so much as always for the support, and I can't wait to see you next time. Take care. Bye.